one video in the sequence of trigonometry where we are looking at the ratios. So this video covers the cosine ratio. Now cosine or cos theta is equal to the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So meaning whatever cos of the angle is, or the cosine of the angle, it must be equivalent or equal in value to the adjacent side being divided by the hypotenuse. Now, for you to be able to use this formula, you must be able to recognize what the adjacent and the hypotenuse sides are. So the hypotenuse is always the longest side, and it's always slanted and opposite from your right angle. The adjacent side is the side of the right angle triangle that is touching the angle and is not the hypotenuse. So whatever the angle is, it will always be formed between two sides. And so whatever side the angle is formed between, that's the adjacent. So in our case, we want to find our adjacent side. Because recognize here, the angle is formed here. This is your hypotenuse, so this must be your adjacent. So we want to find our adjacent side. So the procedures are the same, just like when you're using the sine rule. Fill in your values. So cos theta. So you'll put in cos. Theta, you represent it with your angle, which is 30 in our case, equal to adjacent x over hypotenuse, which is 17 meters. Cross multiply, or you apply the ratio proportions. So it's going to be x times your imaginary one here, and 17 multiplied by cos 13. So 17 meters times cos 13 must be equal to 1 times x is 1x, or just x. So then you can simply type that in on your calculator. So 17 multiplied by cos 13 equals 16.6 meters equals. So your adjacent side is 16.6 meters in this case. And please note, the adjacent side must always be smaller than your hypotenuse. If it's larger, something is wrong in the calculations. Now, another question involving the cos theta rule. Now, look at the sides. So the adjacent, so we are filling them out. So cos, you're putting your angle, 23 equal adjacent 14 meters over hypotenuse x. Now you want to find the value of your hypotenuse. So always remember to fill the values in accordingly. So it's always your adjacent side being divided by your hypotenuse. So it's going to be cos times cos 23 times x must be equal to 14 meters. And how did we get it? Same principle as here. So it's x times 23 and 14 times the one that would have been on the cos 23. Now you need your x by itself. So you divide both sides by cos 23. So x will be equal to 14 meters divided by cos 23 equals. So 14 divided by cos 23 equals 15.2 meters. And that's it. So cross multiply first and then divide both sides by whatever the cos of the angle is, and divide them and you'll get your final length of the hypotenuse. And your hypotenuse must always be longer than your adjacent side. Now, what if you were given your adjacent side and your hypotenuse and you are told to find the angle? The procedure is the same, just like when you are operating with sine. So you'd say cos, since you don't know your angle, you put back your theta, equals, or if they put a letter in it, you can put the letter there, equals the adjacent side, so that's 30 meters, divided by your hypotenuse, which is 16 meters. Theta will be equal to the inverse. So theta will be equal to cos inverse of whatever the fraction was, so 13 over 16. And then you simply just type that on your calculator. To get it, the inverses of functions, if they are not labeled singularly, what you can generally just press shift and then you press the cost, the original cost, and that will give you the cost inverse on your calculator. And then you just simply put in the fraction part and then you'll get your answer. So cost inverse of 13 over 16 is equal to 35.7 degrees. So that's the angle. And these values are rounded off to 1 decimal place. Now, just to give you the general formula for you to use. So rather than have to go through the different steps, in case you are unable to just simply move from step to step, sometimes you are able to remember these. So theta will always be the inverse. So it's always going to be the cos inverse of the adjacent side divided by your hypotenuse. Permanently, that's always going to be it. For if you want your hypotenuse, it will always be equal to your adjacent side being divided by the cos of the angle. And if you want the adjacent side will always be equal to your hypotenuse multiplied by the cos of the angle. So those are the general formulas. So as long as you're working with cos, if you want your adjacent side, you will always result in multiplying your hypotenuse by the cos of the angle. If you want your hypotenuse, you will always result in your adjacent side being divided by the cos of the angle. And if you want the angle itself, it will always be equal to the cos inverse of the adjacent side divided by the hypotenuse. And that's when you're dealing with the cosine rule of trig ratio. So I hope this video would have helped you to understand how to apply the cosine ratio for trigonometry in solving or finding the missing angle or the missing side of your right angle triangle. So tune in again with the third sequence, which is using the tan ratio when you're working with trigonometry.